Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome editor Fiona Brands, who joins us to talk about their work on season 5 of Slow Horses. Fiona will talk us through getting the right balance between the comedic and dramatic elements of the show. Please be warned about heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Fiona. Hi Fiona, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're here to sit down and talk about the latest series of Slow Horses, which is season number 5. How have you found the reception to the show?
Well, it's been great. I think people still really love it. I mean, it's I don't think it's often that on season 5 people are still so keen to see the new show coming out and getting really excited about it, waiting for it. And so yeah, no, I'm really happy about that. And I mean, I've been a fan of the show from the very beginning as well. So it just was such a privilege to be able to actually edit on it. And then also, you're in the kind of catch-22 where you're like, okay, now I know what's gonna happen, so I will never be able to just go back to being an audience for it anymore, which is a bit sad. But this doesn't diminish actually just working it anyway.
Yeah, well, 100%. I think you're watching it in such a different way. Where I guess with season 1 to 4. You're just a fan. You don't know what's going to happen next unless you've read the books. But I guess once you're working on it on such a like frame by frame step that I wouldn't say ruined, but you're kind of like, oh yeah, we know what happened there, or
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember editing that scene. That was day number 76, and we had we had sushi for lunch or something, and yeah, that was a hard scene to cut.
Yeah, and you've got all the kind of news from like the next seasons and everything, right? Because especially with Slow Horses, it's such a machine. They kind of start filming again while you're still editing, and so it's kind of like continuous going. And so I at least know what's going to happen in the next season, so I can't enjoy that either.
Do you find that because there's such a machine, and because they are they are filming them quite quickly? And I think they're like a year ahead in a way. I think they've already done 6 and they're doing 7 now. Does that affect your editing and the post-production process, or is that just something that it's just irrelevant?
I don't think it's irrelevant. I think it does, it has definitely affected us in terms of what the tone of the show kind of develops into. I would say that Saul Metzine, the director for season 5, also directed season 3, and I think he has a very specific style and tone, and he brings a lot of humor into it, right? Like, I mean, there's always action in it, but I think his work in particular also really works with what's funny about Slow Horses. And I think then season 4 was a much darker season, and it was a lot more action based. And then when we came back, I think we had the very difficult we were in the very difficult position to have to almost bridge, what was good about season 3 into season 5, but also not completely ignore what they had done in season 4, which just was totally quite different. And so you do have to really think about what came before you and actually what comes after you. And yeah, I guess in the end you've got our scripts, and Will Smith, the showrunner, is like, he's brilliant, and I mean he has all of this in his head too, so we're getting a script that is written with that in mind. But yeah, then of course you kind of have to think about where you're starting again, and also everyone else, in terms of like everyone who's also working on the show has had that other season in mind, coming back to something that's totally going to be really different. So I think there's a bit of a transition period where everyone has to get into what is this now, what are we making again, or what are we making this time, and really buy into it. I think that's a difficulty, but probably for all kind of running shows, right, where you want to see some development, but you don't want to completely throw overboard everything that has been there before.
Yes, and it's interesting that you have about the tone and how you have to buy into it. I think you do notice how the tone has changed a bit. Like season three, I feel like each season does get better, and I think you could tell that the filmmaking is becoming a lot more like they're taking a bit more risks in what they're using in terms of like if there's extra drones or like the
Hmm.
movement or the longer shots. I think in season five there were. And even season three, you get more of that sort of spy feel of it and the
Hmm.
espionage feel, while season four is that action feel. I guess as an editor as well, as like you need to get that right balance. And as you said, with Soul Seasons, he likes to bring a lot of humor, and there is that really does cut the tension in what's happening. I guess as an editor, like how do you play around with that balance? Because it's I can imagine that like you do a big you cut a scene that's quite heavy, intense, either action or something very valuable is being mentioned, and then there's a bit of humor into it. Like I guess as audience you can might get taken out of it, but how do you as an editor make sure that the audience you don't lose the audience in those moments?
I think a lot of it is trying to find the balance, and it is trial and error. I have to say that we did, take out a lot of more jokes and more fun out of this season than I guess I would have been used to, just so we could really get the balance. I think how to explain it. I think I mean it is such a unique tone with Slow Horses, so you are always trying to find the funny in what's actually there, and a lot of the times the actors really play into it. I think especially right now where they've really, or at this point, and I do think that sort of you could see that from maybe season three onwards, really. They really know who their characters are, and they know what people might want to see from those characters. They give you that funny, within all the sort of seriousness and the kind of I don't know, action and violence and everything. They still give you that, and it's your kind of task as an editor to then decide, okay, is this, how much of this are we going to keep and how much are we going to throw away, and balancing that out, throughout the whole season as well, I think is also quite key. So I mean, me and Jofi, the other editor, we were working together really, really closely, and we've actually known each other for a long time, and we know each other's editing quite well as well, which was really helpful. Because we could just talk to each other and just be like, look, this is what's happening in my episode at this point. What's going on with you there? Or what's going on with you at the end of your episode? Do you think you can tone it down a bit so I can, up, the funny a bit at this point? Or we were even swapping scenes at some point, just kind of experimenting with how we would start or end a scene, and maybe just move an episode and maybe just move one scene over to the other to kind of get more impact in there. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure that all editors kind of talk about balancing out like comedy with drama or action, because it is one of the hardest things to do. And yeah, I find it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of what is the tone of the show, what comes before and after, and how can you continue to have like a satisfying story arc, while also just keeping it flowing, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think as was you saying, like getting the balance right, and I think as you said with the flowing, you don't want that sort of that wink at the camera with the joke. So
Hmm.
people, it's more like it's a one-liner, and then then the scene moves on. I do. I think you do notice that a lot of this series with more of the jokes, and
Hmm.
they're kind of delivered towards the end of conversations, so it's not a moment of like, oh,
Yeah.
this is a bit silly,
Hmm.
but it kind of works in this in the world of Slow Horses. I think that's interesting is what you mentioned, like talking with the other editor regarding like where you are in points and
Hmm.
how you're playing things out, because granted you get you know what you sort of want to go for, but I guess as well, like you kind of want to keep it consistent between the
Hmm.
two of you. But then also maybe selfishly you want to keep in certain scenes because you know that you've worked on it so hard and you just know it's going to work, but you don't want too much funny or too much action to sort of overshadow each other.
I guess yes, but I don't think I'm particularly precious about, I guess, my scenes in that sense. I don't know. I see it as like we're working on all of this together. So yes, I've put work into it, but so has she, right? So I guess like if I'm I think I don't find it that hard to decide, okay, I can give up this scene for the benefit of the whole story, right? Because I think that's what we do all the time, right? I mean, I'm always trying to do my best work, but then of course, the director comes in, the producers come in, the execs come in, and every time you make like a new version of your episode or your episodes. And I think you just can't be precious about it, because I think you would have a really, really hard time when people, take your favorite scene out, or make you recut everything because they want to change the music or something like that. And of course, in the moment, you're a bit annoyed and all these kind of things. But I think in the grand scheme of what it takes to make a project like this with so many people, you just have to be a bit. You have to be able to make compromises, I think, and also like feed off the ideas of others. I think that's really, really important, to just be open to somebody else maybe having a better idea than you have, and then just actually running with it.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, because it's like film is a collaborative process, and when you get the material, it's kind of you have the clay, and now you're just molding it into the final form for the episodes. And I guess with something like this, where there's probably quite a lot of people involved, as you said, there's the producers, there's a director, there's also a showrunner, there's also the studio. I can imagine that it's a lot of plate spinning of like what people would want and what services the story slash what is going to be best. But again, like, that must be very difficult as an editor to sort of have so many different ears, and then I mean not ears but like voices, and then also putting your 2 cents into it as well.
Yeah.
But again, that's filmmaking and collaboration. They need to go hand in hand. What I'm curious to know about as well, because you edited episodes 2, 4, and 6, so you got the finale episode. Is there a way of like you need to follow the tone that's set in episode 1 in the way that it's cut, or are you allowed a little bit more creativity and freedom to sort of play around with your own style in the show?
I never felt like I had to fit into a style in that sense, but maybe that's also, I don't know, maybe that's also because I'm trying as an editor to look at what's in front of me, at the whole thing. So I do look at, what is the show supposed to be like. And, I've looked at season 3 in particular with Saul's directing. And I think if anything, I think I'm probably gonna try and fall in line a lot more with what the director's ideas are for the show, because I think that can always be different. And I do really feel like as an editor, you're kind of trying to explore who the person is that you're working with, what their sort of humor is, what their sensitivities are, and then use all of that knowledge to put your edits together, like in terms of rhythm, what you think they find funny, and how you want to how they approach making all the choices about acting and the setups and the camera movements and all of this. That's I always try and find out about that by just talking to them, trying to find out about them, getting to know them, and then follow that with my own interpretation of what that is. And I do think that's also Jofi's style in the same way, the other editor. So it never necessarily felt like we had to, or I had to follow something I didn't also feel when I was putting it together. And then I guess, especially when you're doing like a finale, I think also for Slow Horses, there've been like 4 other finales beforehand. And if you look at the writing and the structure of it, it's very similar. You have a build up towards like a big action scene in the middle, and then you have to try and tie all these little stories that are still open for all the other characters together afterwards. So you have that structure already, and you're just trying to figure out how to do this in the most economical way. And I don't know if that was something you felt when you were watching Ep 6, but it was very difficult to not let the episode drag on for too long in the end, trying to wrap all these stories up, because there were some really brilliant dialogue scenes between, really, really great actors, and you just really don't want to take anything out of it, but you just have to, because once you've had the big showdown, and of course, there's another little action piece afterwards, but once you've had the really big showdown, the audience just wants you to wrap up the episode and get to the end. There's not that much patience anymore to just build a whole another story arc, and so you try and reduce while just being very truthful to the actors. I think that's probably more what it is. I'm trying to retain what's actually special about the material in front of me, and not just have all of this fall by the wayside just for the sake of timing, or having to get to the end of it, or balance as well, right? Because some jokes are just too funny to take out.
I think as well, like I can imagine like doing the finale is kind of probably the most difficult episode to cut, because as you said, there is so many different scenes of like dialogue, and then also adding in the action, and then you have to tie the episode up. But how do you make sure that you don't drag it for too long, but you want to keep everything in? Especially like, as you said, the dialogue scenes between the actors. I can imagine like as an editor, you kind of get spoiled a little bit, because it's like your own personal little theatre, where you can watch different takes of how people are performing the scene, and then sort of mishing it all together. And I can imagine that sometimes you could get lost, because they are incredible actors and performers, to the point where you think, wow, like I need to use this scene, or how could we cut this scene, or just break it down a little bit. I do not envy you when it comes to something like that.
Yeah, it's always been really difficult, especially when you have a scene like James Callis and Gary Oldman talking to each other, and both of them are very, very different actors, right? But they're both really brilliant, and they're so funny together as well, because they're so different, and they play off the energy of each other. So yeah, no, it's definitely been, but that's the fun of it. That's the best thing ever. If you have all the choices, you can basically go either way. You've got 10 different options, and then you can choose which one you actually want to go with, rather than you're just trying to save a scene that isn't working anyway, right? Yeah, I'd rather be in that position where I have all the choices than having to polish a turd.
Well, yeah, like I think again that is something that's those scenes where Gary Oldman, because he's just so ahead as a character compared to the audience, that you do get lost. I feel like you do get lost in his performance, because he's just so sharp. And I guess there's always like the gimmick is that he just looks like so disheveled, and so like you just think I wouldn't go near him. He's probably, and like sort of the drinking and the smoking, the farting and all of that jazz as well. Yeah, it's incredible. And I as I said as well, like it must be so painful to be like, oh, how do I have to cut this or do this? This is, and cut it down, or just try to make it work within the scene.
Yeah. I think especially with Gary as well, or with his character, with Lem, you really feel when you get too close to him, right? Like if you sort of, like you say, like he's always ahead of us, and he has to be. So he has to always seem to be a bit more. There needs to be something mysterious about him, and you have to kind of keep that mystery by making choices with your editing. I always found that when I was showing too much of his reactions or just too much of his face, when you can just study him for too long, you sort of start to get familiar with him and you really don't want that. So you kind of have to reduce that and kind of cut that down and be more like on him for like an answer, or for like a quick moment when you actually just need it from as to play off the other character, rather than working with a character like River, where you want to be on his reactions and you want to kind of see how flabbergasted he is all of a sudden, or just out of his depth, and that's what makes it funny. But that's just very different, and you have to really learn how all of these characters, or what their function is in each scene and over the whole kind of season as well, I think.
Yeah, and I guess with like a spy show, you kind of need to think about how long, as you mentioned, like how long you want to keep on their reactions, because it kind of gives away the game, really, their reaction, the human nature of it, of like how much they might know. And it's an interesting point how you say on Lamb, you don't want to spend too much time, because you might get a bit too much overreaction and give away what he's thinking. Whilst with River, yeah, poor River, unfortunately, you have to sort of stay on him longer whilst he gets more and more frustrated and can't hide a poker face. Which again, I find as well, like as an editor, do you have like a process of thinking of how long you want to stay on those shots for, or is it just a natural instinct of like, cut here? I don't want it longer than 2 seconds, for example.
I mean, a lot of it is instinct, I would say. I don't really think having like a sort of like a rule does really work in general, because I mean, there's so many variables in each scene, each show, each episode. I think kind of trying to reduce it to this is how long I want to stay on something doesn't really work. I think, I guess, usually you start with the longest version of something, in terms of like your assembly. You kind of think about how long is this actually sustainable, and what does it do if I keep it for that long? And then you start reducing, and you kind of try and see, okay, if I take this bit away, like, is it still gonna feel the same? Is it still gonna actually be funny, or does it give me something that I couldn't predict? I think it is. I think I used to think, I make these decisions and I stick with them because I know why I've done them. But I've also felt more recently that it is worth something sometimes to just try what it actually would be like to just have a really short reaction, and then see if, not for every cut, of course, but like in specific moments, to just see, okay, does it actually still do something else that I hadn't really been expecting? And it also sort of helps me to keep my view on what I'm actually editing a bit fresh, right? By just kind of introducing like a little element of, I don't know, not randomness really, but like to kind of just have this one thing I wouldn't usually do and just try it out and see, okay, yeah, maybe this is actually not a good idea, and so I just put it back. But it helps me just try and keep a fresh perspective on what I'm actually doing, because I think that the worst thing, or the kind of the hardest thing to retain while you're working on a show, like, I mean, especially like this, we kind of worked on this season for a year, is to just come at your own work fresh and still be able to see what you want to change or what you want to do better, or if something is actually still working or not.
Yeah, and I guess as well, like you mentioned it as well, that not for every scene, but you'd want to experiment just a little bit, just to see how things can play out in just a slightly different way or manner, especially like when it's a spy show, where I feel like you can maybe have a bit more creativity, because there is people's poker faces, people's could have their frustrations, or just how people play the characters as well. And I think especially like this season, where you're kind of always like a few steps behind until everything gets revealed. So as an audience member, you're kind of like, I'm not really sure what's going to happen. And sometimes you think it's going to zig and then it zags. And I guess that's like the beauty of the show, and especially like this series. I
Yeah.
know compared to like other series, I feel like you do have that mystery, but I think here it's more that they're going by a playbook. It's like, what is this playbook? How are they,
Mhm.
like, what are they going to do? Because it's this playbook might have been written in the 60s, 70s, but now in modern times, how do you incorporate that into a
Mhm.
modern world?
Yeah, and I think that is what makes Slow Horses so special, that you really I guess you play with the cliches. You kind of don't take it too seriously, and it works because the characters feel like really real. I think, I think that's the reason why you get away with sometimes be funny and everything. I think it's because the characters do feel like they could actually exist, and they're not these sort of hero versions of some, like this perfect, I mean, James Bond-esque kind of figure. And the humor, all of it together does make it into something really, really special. And I think that's what people really appreciate about it.
Yeah, and I think as well, like the fact that, as you mentioned early on, like a lot earlier in the episode, about how season 5 of the show, and it hasn't, people are still going crazy for it, still enjoying it, and I don't know, like the hunger for it is just like growing and growing, and
Mhm.
it is also one of those shows that I think Apple have done really well in like making sure that it comes out pretty much every year. I know season 1 and 2 came out, there was a smaller gap, but especially in like this day and age where sometimes it takes like 3 years for a new season of a TV to come out.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it is sad. Is that sort of like you kind of stay in the world for, you don't sort of forget about what actually happened, and then have to catch up with it again, and then you're back in it, but you stay in it. And then I also think it's like that it does play a lot in London. I think that is something else that makes it like really, really special. Everyone I talk to who isn't in the film industry, who watches Slow Horses and really loves it, they all talk about, the places that they've been in the city that they recognize from the show. And there's just something, they're like a sort of English quaintness, being able to say this as a sort of, a bit more objectively, being German myself. I think that is something that's really special about it, and makes people from, I think, all over the world actually come back to it, because they want to see that. They kind of like the feeling of being in that world.
I feel like they don't romanticize London as much as well in the show.
Mhm.
Like it's the character, but it doesn't feel like the cliche of like here's Big Ben, here's London Eye,
Mhm.
yeah. I feel like they do make London look a little bit more realistic with how like grey it can be with the weather, and
Mhm.
how even parts of London it's not as, I don't want to say glamorous because it's not, maybe that's not the right word, but it's like you might have that sort of iconic part of London, but you do have the rural areas of London
Mhm.
just like when you go further out central.
Mhm.
Um, but even as an editor, are there moments where you need to think about how you can use the city as a character? Because especially in like this series where you are following them around in certain areas, so like where they have the bombing in London Zoo, where they
Mhm.
have the shooting, are there ways where you need to present the city in a certain way?
I think only when you really think about, or when it really comes to placing the locations a bit, and I think that it has more to do with story than necessarily London, right? You kind of have to make decisions about, do you use an establisher at this point, or do you not? Because I think a lot of the times when you kind of do put in like a really wide shot of, the city or something, so you just kind of have this reminder of you're still in London, or you have like the, I don't know, the big red bus kind of going past. I think that is important in some moments to remind yourself of where you are, but also I think you have to be careful not to have that stop the story in its tracks, because I think a lot of the time, the rhythm and the humor and just the kind of just moving it forward comes from just moving on with the dialogue, and just not having too big of a break in between. But then, of course, you also have to make sure the audience can follow that. We have now, we've now finished this bit. We are now back with, I don't know, Taverna in the park, for example. So we have to have an establisher of the park to to give us that moment where we can just settle to then take on new information of some other people talking to each other, right? I think that is probably more something I would think about when I'm using, other shots of the city. I think in itself, when you kind of just have a scene set in the Barbican, for example, like you don't necessarily. I mean, I think it gives it something. I think kind of even making the choice to put it there for, I don't know, the architectural value of that building and what that actually makes people feel when they walk around there does have some merit. But that's of course not something that I decide, but like I just get that as part of the footage that I receive, and it resonates with me in the way that hopefully the director and the cinematographer have intended to.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, like you do forget that that you are like in the Barbican area and in other parts of London. I do like that they kind of, maybe this series kind of feels like it branched out a little bit more inside of London, because I think there's a bit what they're in like the Peckham car park complex, and it overlooks the city, and it's like a really beautiful view. And then they're also where the shootings happen in that sort of like square. I feel like that's something that it's like something that you kind of forget about it, that is in London, and how important they were in a way. And also I think it gives yourself like a bigger sense of geography, of like the extent of like how much they have to, the slow horses, how much ground they have to cover. And like you forget how big London can be at times, and how they have to split up and how it pushes the story along.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point as well. I mean, it could just also really be quite detrimental for us, to be honest, because, sometimes, what we do talk about is like, how quickly can they actually get to places? This is realistic, how does it make sense at this point to somebody watching it that this is happening at the same time? But of course, we have to show it one after the other. And that is something we've talked about quite a lot while editing it. And it kind of goes into this element of misdirection that you mentioned, where you decide to kind of give some information, but not so much that you as an audience know exactly what is going on, where they are or what's going to happen. And that sort of really helps you with the geography as well, because you just gain a little bit of freedom that way, to just have things happen that very unrealistic, happening at the same time, basically.
Yes, 100%. And like, especially with like the geography, where you think, oh, they can get to this area quickly because it's a TV show, we could do that. But realistically, it's also actually, we are, I don't know, 5 miles away, but then also it's London, so 5 miles is actually an hour drive. But then, oh my gosh, there's all this traffic because these engines are exploded. So then it's like, yeah, there's no, I don't know what the time limit would be.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting part of it. There's something I'm curious to know, and maybe this is like more of a personal level, because as an editor, you're jumping into a show that's in its 5th series. There's a, I guess there's like the editorial grammar is already sort of established within the show, and how it sort of flows and how the story is told. But as an editor coming in for the 5th series of Slow Horses, how do you go about cutting the show but not losing your identity in the process of it?
I think it has a lot to do with choosing the people that you work with. And, I mean, this is, of course, not always something you can do as an editor, but I would say that there is no point in working with someone who doesn't in some way align with your own style and with your own sort of sensitivity of what you actually want to achieve, because you're just going to be working against each other the whole time, and you're not going to get what they want to do, and they're not going to understand why you've done something. They'll probably think you're, I don't know, making lots of weird decisions. And so I think that is definitely my first, and of course there's like a limit to how much choice you have there. But I do really think being able to just interrogate that in the very beginning before you kind of get on a job is really important. And I mean, I've even come to think a lot about, or like ask the questions in an interview about what execs expect like a show to be. And I mean, it's different with Slow Horses, and because everyone already knows what this is. But I think when you come to making a show that people haven't, it's a first season or like a limited series or something like that, it's always good to try and understand what everyone's idea is of what it's going to be, and then hopefully realize that they all think it's going to be the same thing, and you can actually deliver that as well. And with Slow Horses, I've known Saul for a while. I mean, it's the first time we've been working together, but I've known him for a few years, and it was, I kind of met him, I think, when he was editing Brassic in Manchester, and I knew that we have the same sense of humor. We have the same kind of sensitivity when it comes to characters. He's somebody who kind of really likes working with the characters, and that is something that is very close to my own, I guess, style as well. I always kind of go over character before story, because I feel like even if a story isn't quite perfectly written, if you actually really can resonate with the characters and understand their emotional and inner world, you forgive things that might not be quite so perfect in how the story is actually being told. And so I think that is what is the most important thing to me, to be honest. And I tend to work with the same people. I tend to work with the same directors, coming back to teams that I've already worked with. And within that, kind of margin, of course, there are differences, but yeah, I think you can't work against yourself. So, if there really is something that has nothing to do with you, I'm not entirely sure if I personally could just pretend it's something else, because for me, it's a lot about my instincts and how I feel about something watching it, and I just would literally not understand what somebody is talking about when they would want me to edit it in a completely different way to what I think it should be.
It's interesting because I do sort of want to figure out like how, when you're in something like this where it is a well-oiled machine, how you sort of play your part in it, but then also don't get lost as a creative and working on it. And as he's mentioning as well, working with the same people helps, because you kind of, it's the shorthand of when you're probably in the edit suite and understanding what needs to be done. But then also, I think sometimes you don't need to be told what needs to be done, because you already know what people are like. And as you said, with soul, a sense of humor and what they sort of want to establish. And maybe it's probably easier, but then also harder at the same time on something like Slow Horses, because you need to get that balance right. And there's a lot of different people with opinions and that will kind of want to get their opinion across, but then also do what's best collectively.
Yeah, but then also, I guess, with Slow Horses in particular, everyone knows what we are making, and they wouldn't have hired me if they wouldn't feel like I understand what they're doing. So I think there is at least like a core understanding of, yes, we all like the same thing. And then of course there are scenes where I had to do things that I probably wouldn't have chosen to do, because this is like somebody's, I don't know, somebody really wants to see this. But that's still okay, because I think in the end, what you change in terms of notes that you get after you've done at least the sort of director's cut, what you actually change about the whole program is maybe 10% of it all. When it really comes down to it, you never actually change that much more in terms of all the decisions that you actually already made up until that point. So it might be different. There might be choices that you had to make that are quite hard because you kind of really got used to something, or you really just like something and you don't want to to kind of destroy what you've done there. It still probably isn't going to touch the core of what you had in mind when you first put your assembly down, or at least, you know, what you've had in mind when you worked with your director to make that first director's cut.
Yeah, and I guess as well, like, there's so much sort of going on at the same time that you just sort of roll with the punches and present what you can and work with the footage as presented. Yeah, it's kind of interesting though as well, like just the way that it works, because as audience members, we only get to see the final show, but then, you know, each scene there might have been like 50 emails and 10 Zoom calls just to decide if it's correct or if it just needs to be shortened or lengthened.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually. I mean, it's usually very particular moments in the episodes that people have an issue with. It usually isn't actually every scene you go through. It's there are sometimes things that would have never thought that this is something that, you know, becomes such a big talking point, and then all of a sudden it really is. And you have to do, I don't know, 20 different versions of the same thing basically until everyone is happy about it. But it really usually isn't, you know, that you go through every scene and you kind of everything is up for grabs basically. And you know, we wouldn't really have the time for that either, right? Like, I mean, that's the other thing too. We can't really, you know, come in and just redo all these editing decisions that I've already made basically.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I guess more of a sort of sweeping generalization over it all. But it's funny though as well, like you probably have to think about, you might have done episode 2, but once you're back on episode 4, oh, this little scene has happened here, so we need to somehow, it's been set up in episode 2, needs to be paid off in 4 or 5 or 6, which is kind of like probably another tightrope that needs to be walked on, which probably is quite difficult. I just want to hit you up with my penultimate question. What was your favorite scene that you didn't edit?
That I didn't edit. I think that must be the scene in episode 5 when Tara is going down the Piccadilly Circus tube station, and the music comes on, and it's like this intercutting between the park and them realizing that they've been played, and Tara coming up the stairs on the other side and just, you know, pulling up her hair. And yeah, I think it's just such an epic scene. I really just like that. It's just fun, you know, it's just really, really fun. And I think it kind of really, yeah, just gives you like the whole of Slow Horses in a nutshell. So I really, really enjoy that.
Yeah, that's a very solid scene. I think that was the sort of, I think that's the moment as audience members, you're like, oh, like everybody's been played and it's coming, and then it's like, we're going to be blinded, how are we going to do this? And it's like, but no, you're forgetting that it's like, it's modern times, so this is how you become blind. You're just like, I feel like, again, it's one of those great tricks that Slow Horses played, that it's a scene that you're like, wow, this is actually incredible.
Yeah, and also me and the other editor had a little cameo in that one, so you know, it's always going to be special to me.
Perfect. You know, if anyone ever asks, you know, that's
exactly.
Put it on the show reel. I'm right there. And then just for my final question, what was your favorite scene to edit?
I mean, I guess like one of my favorite scenes definitely was the paint pot falling onto Gimbal's head at the end of episode 4, where you've got all these different things falling into place, you know, Cole going down the stairs, and then the cable roll thing kind of just rolling off and going down. And it's just one thing after another, and you kind of just have this dread of like something is now going to happen, and I don't know what it is. And in the end, it's actually, you know, the paintboard falling and Gimbal is dead. And well, the horse is basically having fulfilled, you know, this plan, or the point or the step on the Libyans list for them basically. I thought it was really, really funny.
Again, that's a solid choice as well, and it's all like, again, that's the, as mentioned, is like the balance of the humor and what's happening, and Yeah, I do like that scene, and I think you kind of feel like you know what's going to happen, but then you don't know if it's just going to be a near miss or if it's just going to be played as like a whoopsie, and then it's just like, yeah, it's
Hmm.
it's not a great look.
Mm. But then, I mean, this is a really hard choice because then also there are so many nice dialogue scenes, between the characters that, yeah, I think this is the obvious one, but, there are definitely others that I really enjoyed as well.
I think personally, my favorite of the series is the when Lamb is talking about the torture.
Hmm.
Everybody's kind of locked in, and then
Yeah.
the scene gets played out. I
Hmm.
think that's yeah, that's a really, really like delightful scene, and
Yeah.
just how easy you can get captivated by the performance and the story.
Yeah.
You don't know if it's true or not, but I think you do get a hint of it being true with like
Hmm.
with it at the end of the series.
Yeah. And I mean, this is such a hard thing to pull off as well because it's so much dialogue, right? And you kind of are just waiting for something to happen and to actually, get this all into place. And have you be so captivated is definitely a testament to Jofi's editing talents, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And you're just lost in it, and you get pulled in just like the agents, and you're just like, wow, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, definitely. It's good.
Fiona, thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you.
Slow Horses season 5 is streaming now on Apple TV. Go out and watch Fiona and everyone's great work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You take care, and bye bye.
Hey, you too. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.